Well, yesterday was September 11th, and all across New York and across the United States, we took time to remember those who were victims of the September 11th tragedy. Now, you do understand September 11th, usually here in New York, it falls on a Tuesday. That's usually associated with Primary Day, but in honor of September 11th, Primary Day is moved now to September 13th here in New York, and there's no campaigning. There's nothing going on the 11th. But today, candidates are back on the grind. We want to talk a little bit about what's happening in the world of politics. And joining us now via phone, we're pleased to have Michael Benjamin. And Michael Benjamin is the associate editorial page editor from the New York Post. And you've seen him here on Open, hashed it out with us before. Michael, good to have you.
Thank you, Daren. Good to be on with you.
Hey, good. Let's talk about this here as we talk about September 13th, Primary Day, a big day here in New York. And let's talk a little bit about the race for governor for a second. Governor Andrew Cuomo, of course, the incumbent, Cynthia Nixon making her voice heard. But anything that we can expect out of this race?
Other than the fact that, looking for a higher than usual turnout in New York City, the governor's really pushing for a big turnout numbers for himself. He wants to defeat Miss Nixon with a big mandate within the Democratic Party. She's the voice of the rising progressive movement in New York Democratic state politics. The polls show him with at least a 40-point lead, but polls have been wrong in some major local contests. And so he doesn't want to be surprised, and he's pulling out all the stops. And they've now been accused of dirty tricks and trying to paint her as an anti-Semite and anti-Israel, and using state resources to promote his campaign. So he's facing that in the final days of election. Instead of discussing policies, it's now about character and dirty tricks.
Yeah, all the time we find out about the character assassinations and the things that are being thrown out there that sometimes we don't even get a chance to talk about the issues because we have to spend too much time talking about character. Let me move a little bit further to the lieutenant governor's race. Of course, that race a lot of people are paying particular attention to as current incumbent Lieutenant Governor Kathy Hochul is facing strong opposition from Jumaane Williams. Any chance that Jumaane Williams has a chance for an upset?
I don't know. I wouldn't think so, only because the party apparatus is behind Hochul. And Jumaane is well known in New York City, but I don't think that translates into votes in many of the upstate counties. You have minority sections of Buffalo and Rochester that might vote for him. That doesn't mean that it's enough to overwhelm Hochul. I think if there were a third candidate in the race, lieutenant governor, Jumaane might have had a bigger chance at an upset. But we won't know until 11 o'clock midnight on Thursday.
Yeah, I think a lot of us are going to be glued to the screen for 11 o'clock, 12 o'clock midnight on Thursday looking for the results of the primary. Another race that we want to talk about is the race for New York State Attorney General. You've got several candidates that are in that race as well. Zephyr Teachout getting a couple of endorsements. Letitia James, the New York City public advocate, and Alicia Eve also in that race, along with Congressman Maloney. How do we see this playing out?
I see Tish James pulling it out. It is a multi-person race. I think she has the edge. I think Sean Patrick Maloney, the congressman, will cancel out Zephyr Teachout. And I think that all the polls are showing that Miss Eve is trailing way behind at around 3% in the polls. Again, I think Tish James pulls it out. Sean Patrick Maloney and he and Teachout, I think, will cancel each other out. And then there's a segment of voters who don't like the fact that Congressman Maloney is running for two offices at the same time.
Right, but what do you make of the whole conversation? Because there's a conversation that's being had that when you look at Letitia James, that it's much of the same because she represents the establishment, and you need somebody that's going to have to deal with the whole corruption issue coming out of New York State.
But that's not the job of the Attorney General of New York State. The Attorney General of New York State is more of a civil lawsuit lawyer. He's not a criminal prosecutor. While it's true the current Attorney General's office works in concert with the state comptroller to go after corruption at a local level involving local elected officials, contract fraud, that kind of thing. But it's really difficult for them to set up an integrity unit to go after the legislature with whom they're a co-equal branch of government. and they have to work with. It's unfortunate, but it's not within their portfolio, and neither is challenging President Donald Trump or the federal government unless it has an adverse impact on the state and state policy. Really would be nice if they talked about their other role, which is to enforce charity registration, to make sure that New Yorkers aren't ripped off by charity. The charities make the proper filing, including the Trump Foundation, who the previous Attorney General Schneiderman determined was not doing everything by the books.
Yeah, we talked about we talked in previous conversations and interviews with some of these candidates, and they did say one of the things they wanted to do was be very intentional about focusing on President Trump and some of his dealings here as his business dealings, which is his headquarters. Do you foresee any swift action coming there if any of these people are elected?
No, I think they're going to fulfill their duties, and they're going to go after their promises. They're going to go after the president, his foundation. I mean, to me, they're going to do the same thing that many Republican state attorney generals did when Obama was president, in opposing his policies and going to state and federal court to try to block him, whether it's on the Affordable Care Act or other initiatives that President Obama and his administration have proposed that some people thought was good for the nation, but some Republicans played politics and were going to try to block his policies at every turn. And now Democrats, whatever the reason, they're doing something similar or planning something similar with Donald Trump, who has given him some reason to be in constant opposition to him. But there are other aspects to the job of the New York State Attorney General when it comes to protecting New Yorkers in other areas, and they ought to talk about doing that and doing that well.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk about the midterm elections. You talked about the president for a second. Midterm elections are coming around the corner with the Manafort trial and also Michael Cohen accepting a plea deal. What do you think happens with the midterm elections? We often said that the president has his base continuously. Is this going to really have an adverse effect on the GOP come November?
Not. Well, in New York State, it'll probably continue and turn blue. I think some Republicans will have issues, will have problems, may not win re-election. Across the nation, it all depends on what happens between now and then, what other issues, what other things happen that paints the Republican Party bad, and what things the president does that encourages greater turnout by Democrats who are motivated to thwart him. And as we know, historically, first-term presidents have miserable midterm elections. Their party tends to lose. Democrats need to win both the House and the Senate if they're going to aggressively move against President Trump, even if that means trying to move forward with impeachment hearings and the impeachment process, and then having a Democratic Senate convicting him on the evidence of whatever crime or misdemeanors they think he's committed, to try to force him out of office, at least block some of his initiatives that are they believe are bad for a majority of Americans and the nation. And there's no doubt that the Trump White House, it seems to be quite chaotic, and he seems quite mercurial and not having a full grasp of foreign policy and other policy initiatives, and that understanding how the office works, and his constant talk about personalizing things and going after the media, and his constant tweeting that contradicts standing U.S. policy and catches his own aides by surprise when he makes these sudden pronouncements.
Does the Democratic Party have enough, I should say, to be able to take the House and or the Senate? I mean, they say yes.
Yeah, it's quite possible that they can. They only have to win, I think, 25 seats in order to gain control of the House. I think they need to gain at least 5 or 6 in the Senate to have absolute control, and where they'll need Republican Senate votes to pass legislation or to block President Trump. If anything, I think Democrats win. We're going to see as much gridlock as we saw during the time where President Obama had to contend with a Republican Congress.
Yeah, a lot to look forward to. Let me ask you about the president's comments. I talked to Assemblyman Pichardo just in this last segment about his comments concerning Puerto Rico. Given the fact that many of us are paying attention with all eyes on Hurricane Florence, given the fact that this hurricane is coming, a lot of people who are in Puerto Rico particularly are offended by the president's comments, talking about they've done a masterful job and a good job of handling Puerto Rico. Your take?
And they should be angry at the president for his erroneous statements, his calculated misstatements, and an outright lie. And so what the federal government has done. He sees every criticism of the government as a personal criticism and attack on him. So he's trying to defend his honor by claiming what, in fact, is not true. I think all, I guess, fair and unbiased assessments show that the federal government under President Trump fell down on the job when it came to responding to the crisis in Puerto Rico and even in Texas. They're still trying to recover because FEMA was not as effective as it could have been. And for the president to claim because Puerto Rico is an island, it's difficult to get to because you have to travel there by boat. I mean, that's like a third grader's discussion of how to respond to a hurricane that affected an island. It's untrue. The president basically made up an untruth, and he's trying to stick with it. But there's a great deal of pushback, and the people on the ground in Puerto Rico, they know what would happen, and other members from New York State who've been there, and they know what's happening and how slowly the recovery has been, and what the truth was when it came to the number of people who died either in the hurricane or in its aftermath.
All right. Well, Michael Benjamin, we got to leave it there. Thank you so much for joining us and giving us our political roundup today. Mike Benjamin, thanks a lot.
All right, Darren. Thank you.
All righty. Stay with us. We've got more show coming up right after this.